Welcome to the 2020 Distinguished Faculty Lecturer. Virtual in presentation, but exciting in content, it is an honor to introduce this year's DFL Award winner. Lee L. Brice, professor in the Department of History, earned his doctorate in philosophy and history, ancient Rome and Greece, from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He earned his Master's of Arts degree in ancient history from the University of Houston and a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. Brice joined Western's faculty in 2003 as an assistant professor. He has served multiple terms with Faculty Senate as well as held the position of Secretary of Faculty Senate. Dr. Brice was elected as a fellow to the American Numismatic Society, named the Gale Distinguished Lecturer at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, as well as receiving the honor of Distinguished Visiting Lecturer in Ancient History at Auckland University, Auckland, New Zealand, and the Elizabeth Whitehead Distinguished Professor at the School of Classic Studies in Athens, Greece. He was named a visiting professor of history at Illinois State University and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and instructor in classics at Sweetbriar College, Virginia. Dr. Brice was co-director of study abroad trips to Greece, Rome, and Campania, and participated in multiple extended research trips to Greece, Italy, and the United Kingdom. He served as president of the Association of Ancient Historians from 2014 to 2017. During his tenure as faculty advisor for Phi Alpha Theta International Honor Society, the society was designated as Outstanding Student Organization by the College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Brice was awarded the College of Arts and Sciences Faculty Excellence Award in 2016 for research and scholarly activity, as well as awarded the College of Arts and Sciences 2008 Faculty Excellence Award in Teaching, Mentoring Undergraduate Research, and Outstanding First Year Experience Teacher Award. He was co-organizer of the History Faculty Colloquia from 2009 to 2012. Dr. Brice has served on numerous department, college, and university committees. Dr. Brice lectured, delivered keynote addresses, and presented papers in numerous international and national conferences of professional associations. Dr. Brice has received several international and WIU internal grants and has published 7 books on ancient warfare and history, 2 most recently in 2020, titled People and Institutions in the Roman Empire and New Approaches to Greek and Roman Warfare. Dr. Brice authored and co-authored several book chapters, encyclopedia entries, and published numerous articles in professional journals and participated in many book reviews by invitation. He is the senior editor of Research Perspectives in Ancient History and editor of a peer-reviewed book series, Warfare in the Ancient Mediterranean, Bill's Companions to the Classical World. The 2020 faculty lecture is entitled The Colts of Corinth Revisited, a numismatic study. Dr. Brice will offer insights into the results of an ongoing study of small-denomination silver coinage of ancient Corinth and its place in the history of coinage. He will provide us with an opportunity to learn about ancient Greek history and economic history and how it reverberates in the present, in the money we carry and use today. In addition, the lecture will expose the audience to the field of numismatics and demonstrate the importance of the field and its relevance to modern history. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lee Brice, our 2020 Distinguished Faculty Lecturer.
Hello, I'm Lee Brice, Professor of History, and tonight I would like to start my talk with some thank yous. I'd like to thank the Distinguished Faculty Lecture Committee for selecting me for this honor, and I would also like to thank Interim Provost Billy Clow for presenting me with this honor this last year. Tonight, my goal is to present to you some field that you have not encountered before, and to also introduce you to my own faculty research. And with that, let's get started. Numismatics. You may not have ever heard of numismatics before, but you've all heard of its topic. Its topic is coin, the coin, whether it's a dime or a quarter. These objects have much to tell us. For example, the lowly dime, you look at it and you say, it's just a dime. I can't buy anything with it. And yet, on that coin, there's the head of an individual facing to your left. There's also a statement on the tail side incurring peace, valor, and liberty. And yet the coin is bilingual, even though America itself is not bilingual, English and Latin. The quarter also has a story to tell. Again, Washington facing to the left. What difference does it make that he faces to the left? And what about the eagle? Why is the eagle looking to its side instead of forward? Why is this coin also bilingual? And the vegetation and the arrows, it's sending a mixed message of war and peace. What's going on here? Well, in fact, this coin, as a numismatist would tell you, actually can date its pedigree back to a coin over 2,000 years old. This coin of Ptolemy I, king of Egypt, in about 303 BCE, minted this coin. On the right, you can see the eagle, again, looking to your left, and Ptolemy himself in profile, like Washington, but this time looking to his right. And you wonder, does this statement that the coin engraver is making, is this saying that George Washington is a king? Perhaps. Something to think about. And these are the kinds of questions that numismatists concern themselves with. And so my talk tonight is in two parts. Part one, I want to talk about what is numismatics. Give you a very brief introduction to it. Give you the basics, as it were, before I get into my own research. And then in part two, we'll explore my own research into ancient coinage and what this has revealed about the ancient world and why this research matters. Numismatics is a study of coins, all coins, modern and ancient, and it includes money of all kinds. Paper money, plastic money, if you go to other countries, are also included, as well as other forms of money that existed both simultaneously and before coined money. The branch of numismatics that I work in is ancient Greek coinage. The Greeks did not invent coins, but they adopted it from Anatolia, the kingdom of Lydia specifically, and then it spread like wildfire through the Greek world. Within 50 years, traveling from Anatolia, and cities began using it all the way across the Mediterranean world. In the discussion that follows, I will be using some specialized vocabulary. And it would help you to have a sense of this before I get started. You can use this to impress others. Maybe you can win a bar bet with it. The key words on this slide are the two obverse and reverse that you can see on either side. Now, normally when you flip a coin these days, you think of heads or tails. But when numismatists talk about coins, we tend to think of coins in terms of obverse and reverse, which work much the same way as it has heads and tails. The obverse is the side that tended originally to be a nicer image than the reverse. And then the reverse was slightly rougher than the obverse coins, as I'll explain. In modern coinage, heads is the obverse and tails is the reverse. And that's a function of how coins are struck, as we'll find in a minute. The type, the second word that you need to know, a type refers to the image or images on a coin. So George Washington on the quarter, that's the coin type. On this coin that's in this picture, it's the Pegasus and the helmeted woman, that is Athena. Those are the coin types. So those major images that you see on every coin, those are the types. So don't call them pictures, don't call them symbols. They are coin types when a numismatist is working with them. The field is that open space on the coin, that space around the image of the head, which allows you to see what could fit in there, but for whatever reason hasn't been chosen. And it's important to keep in mind, when you think about that field, nothing on a coin is there by accident. Every single item that's on that coin was there by purpose. Someone chose to put it there. The ethnic, as you see on the bottom of the coin of this vocabulary diagram, the ethnic is the item, either a letter or a word, that refers to the state, city, or other issuing authority that's sending out the money. So, for example, on a quarter and a dime, the United States of America is the ethnic on that coin. On this coin, on this slide, it's the letter Kappa that you can see right there underneath the Pegasus. And I'll come back to this later. The Kappa is the first letter in the word Corinth, which is where this coin is from. Lastly, the control mark. The control mark is that symbol behind the head of Athena on the reverse of this coin. And a control mark is used by cities in order to keep control of the silver lots or to identify which magistrate actually struck a series of coins. We don't always know in the case of ancient terms, which this is, but modern coins also use control marks. If you ever look closely at a dime or a quarter, you'll notice they sometimes have a P or a D on them. P for Philadelphia Mint, D for the Denver Mint. If you're very lucky, you can find an S control mark on a coin. That is for the mint in San Francisco. And sometimes you'll also find coins that don't have mint marks, and those are from mints which these mints sometimes did not use control marks. But we have control marks, and they're used for a variety of purposes. And one of the things numismatists investigate is, what do these control marks tell us? How do they help us to organize the coin? So that's the key vocabulary. Keep it in mind because there will be a quiz later. How do you make a coin? Well, the coin making process was not especially complicated, but it was difficult and arduous to use because it was manual. Unlike now where we can stamp out coins and produce millions of coins every day, in the ancient world it wasn't like that. In the ancient world you could only produce as much coinage as you had precious metal on hand. And as you can see from this illustration, you get a sense of the steps that are occurring. The first step, of course, is the metallurgical step. Someone has to process the silver. Some coins are made out of gold, some coins are made out of bronze, but the coins that I work on are made out of silver. So in the upper right-hand side of this picture, you can see an individual working on processing the silver, refining it to make it purer. And that person will then, when they've refined it, pour it into molds that are shaped in a semicircular fashion. The silver is poured into those molds, and each mold is pre-measured to produce a certain amount of silver in a blank, or flan as we call it, that is going to become a coin. Once that silver has cooled to a certain point, it's popped out, kind of like an ice tray. When you go to your ice tray, you pop out the ice that's in there. With the coins, it's the same sort of thing. Once they've dried, you bang them out of that mold, as you can see in the next picture, and then an individual will be in charge of weighing those silver blanks and also waiting for them to cool a little bit more. Because you don't want to make these blanks into coins while they're too moist. If you do that, they go splat. It's rather like hitting your pancake with a hammer. Nobody likes that. So after this individual has weighed and measured and counted these blanks, they'll be sent over to the anvil. And in the anvil, that's where the real work begins. You'll notice as you look at this anvil that on the bottom of the anvil there is a piece of metal stuck inside the anvil. That's called a die. When you make a coin, essentially you have a die for either side. And the die is the reverse of the design you want to get later. So one die is put into the anvil, and that one doesn't move. It stays stationary. The other die is held by an extra individual who's holding it with a pair of tongs. Here in this picture, you can see that this individual is holding it with tongs, and if you look in the upper right of this slide, you'll see on this Roman coin a pair of tongs and a hammer and two dies that we have from the Roman period. So he's going to hold that die, and then the other guy with the hammer, his aim better be good because he's going to be hitting that reverse die, and that's what we call the die that the man is holding with tongs. We call it the reverse. So now you can see you have the obverse die, which is stuck into the anvil. You have the reverse die, which is the die that's being held with the tongs. These two are kind of a loosey-goosey process in that what I mean is there's not a great deal of control employed as far as are they aligned, are these two kinds of dies going to line up with each other. Some mints went to a great deal of trouble to align the two dies, the reverse and the obverse, to make sure they would line up when they came out as coins. But most mints don't do that. And as we'll see when we look at the coins, some of them are very significantly off-center. So he'll hammer it, making the coin, and once it's made, boom, it's now a fiduciary. It's now usable as regular money in that city. And this is an example of an obverse die of Athens. You can see from its shape, it's intended to be inserted into an anvil. And you can see the reverse of what we're going to end up with the coin. We have the owl, symbol of Athena, and we have an abbreviation of her name as well as the abbreviation of the city of Athens, Alpha, Theta, Epsilon. To the owl's right is also a sprig of olive, which was the tree sacred to Athena. Here's another illustration of a little more close up of how the die process works. On the bottom left, you have what we would call the obverse or anvil die. So this die has been set into a heavy-duty metal anvil. These are modern reproductions which we use in order to illustrate for educational purposes. On the upper left picture here, you have the reverse die, which is smaller and isn't set in the anvil. And then the numismatist has grabbed the reverse die, and with the hammer, she's going to make a metal blob, which you can see in between the two dies in the picture on the right. She's going to make that into a coin by hammering it. But what you'll notice is that the reverse die takes a great deal of abuse. And that's because it's getting hit with the hammer all the time. And this hammer makes part of the numismatist's work possible. What you're going to get when the coin comes out is this exact coin. This is a coin of Alexander the Great, though this one was struck after his death. So we call this a posthumous issue. This coin of Alexander the Great, on the left you have possibly either Heracles or Alexander. There's some debate about who that actually is. And on the right you can see Zeus with his eagle sitting in his throne, and behind his name is the name of Alexander the Great. This is his coin. You'll also notice on this picture, however, you have the obverse on the left and the reverse on the right. And when numismatists put pictures on slides, they tend to put the obverse on the left. The reason for that is so you always know where heads and tails. And here you can see how we got heads and tails. Alexander started that, putting the head on the coin with the obverse and always putting it, you have a reverse with some other symbol. And the way you always know a reverse when you see it in a picture like this, the reverse, because that hammer strikes it the way it does, the reverse is always cup-shaped. It's always concave. And so you have that to always figure out, if you don't know any other way to figure it out, which side of an ancient coin is the obverse and which side of the ancient coin is the reverse. Because with ancient coins, not every city put the head on the obverse. Some, like Corinth, will put the head on the reverse. So heads and tails doesn't work for ancient coins, but if you remember that cup shape, you can always tell what the reverse of an ancient coin is. Another thing you may notice about this picture is this line that runs across Alexander's face, or Heracles' face. The line, it runs across from his chin. You can see it running back toward his ear. It also runs across his hair. This is what happens when the die breaks. This die has begun to fail, and it's a natural process. What you've got is you've got that hammer, and the hammer's coming down on top of the reverse die, and it's a great deal of force. Normally what will happen is when a die begins to break, you'll begin to see aspects of this cracking occur. Starts small and it builds up as it goes along. Usually the reverse die will break first. And when a die breaks, one of two things will happen. If it's a small break, like this one on this slide here, what the artist will do, the engravers will come in and they'll recut the die so that they can continue to use it. But if the break is a bad break, and this one is about to be a very bad break, they'll just simply throw it out and start using a new die. Then that makes it easier to trace the order in which the dies are going, because if they're throwing them out and not reusing them, we don't have to worry about it. Typically what happens with coins is reverse dies, because they get hit with the hammer, they're going to break far more often than the obverse. In fact, experimental archaeologists have found that you can get roughly 10,000 coins out of a standard reverse die, at least that's with the technology that they've used. 10,000 coins out of a reverse die versus 30,000 out of a obverse die, both having been made the same way. You get a sense that you're going to go through a great many reverse dies for every obverse die. And that makes it possible for the numismatists to do part of their analysis. One of the kinds of studies that numismatists engage in, I talked about iconography already, they also engage in a die study. A die study is what you get whenever you want to try to figure out the relationship between two coins or the relationship between a series of coins. So for example, like DNA analysis, which we've all heard of on TV and you may have heard of in your biology classes, DNA analysis for coins is called a die study. Because what you do is you are comparing the reverse dies and looking for the order in which the reverse dies broke and were replaced. And the way you figure that out is by looking for relationships between the reverse dies and the obverse dies. And that's shown here on this slide in front of you. What you'll notice is if you look, you'll see that the round numbers up top are very few, whereas the square boxes underneath are many more. And that's because, as you can see on the slide, the top line is the obverse die, bottom line is marking the reverse dies. The lines mark the relationships between these obverses and these reverses. And so a numismatist will come along and he'll make this, and it is tedious, this very tedious diagram in order to illustrate it. But what the numismatist is trying to find out, she's trying to figure out what order the coins go in. What's the relationship between two coins? Because if we can figure that out, we can also figure out a number of other important aspects of this coinage. And a die study is, well, let's face it, the gold standard, as it were, no pun intended, of work with coins. Another kind of analysis that numismatists engage in is using archaeological evidence, in particular hordes. These are assortments of coins that were brought together on purpose, so there's intentionality involved. And then those groups of coins were lost. Either somebody buried them and then there was a crisis and they didn't get back to dig them up, or they were buried in an earthquake and never recovered that way, or they were a deposit, say, for a temple. Somebody buried a votive deposit. And so numismatists will come in and look at those assortment of coins and try to see the relationship between the different coins that are in that group. And as a result, they'll be able to figure out something about the date of the horde or the circulation patterns that were in use at the time. And you can see that there are typically 5 kinds of hordes. And I'm not going to go into these in great detail, but because their names pretty much talk about what they are. The emergency horde tells you exactly what was in circulation at the time the emergency occurred. Savings horde is going to have lots of different coins spread over a great deal of time because it's like your piggy bank. You're dropping in the coins every time you think about putting money in that jar. And so as a result, you have a savings horde. And in fact, if I remember correctly, there is a coin shortage out there right now because lots of people have savings hordes and can't get them out to the bank. There's also the mint horde or official horde. These are hordes that are made from when a mint wants to hold on to a series of coins, and then for whatever reason, those coins are found later by archaeologists having been brought together, but then left in the city's deposit. A grave deposit. We've all heard of the idea that you pay the ferryman. Well, of course, that's genuine. The ancient Greeks, you would leave an obol, a small silver coin, for the ferryman to carry you across the river Styx. And although that coin was often put in the mouth of the person being buried, you could also sometimes find that a bunch of coins would be given to an individual. And for whatever reason, because that was the custom at the time or the custom in that particular city. And that would be what you would find, what archaeologists would find in that excavation. Or you had the votive offering, which is an offering to the gods for a particular temple. So numismatists are going to use both archaeological data as well as the coins themselves to come to a wide variety of conclusions. And this brings us to my own research. My own research is a die study. It's a die study of the city of Corinth. Corinth, one of the top 3 ancient cities of ancient Greece in the classical period, was one of the first 3 cities on the mainland Greece to actually begin striking coins. It began striking coin around the 3rd quarter, 4th quarter of the 6th century, probably around 525 BCE. Corinth is famous in the Greek world because of its location. As you can see with this arrow, Corinth is in the Peloponnesus, but right on the isthmus. And so that was an important trading post for trade, moving from the east to the west and west to the east, as well as moving from Athens into the Peloponnesus and back and forth. And so as a result, Corinth became an extremely wealthy city. And it produced a great deal of coinage during its period. And yet, in spite of the fact that it produced a great deal of coinage, the coinage is insufficiently understood. And that's what attracted me to working on this project. When we talk about the coins of Corinth, and you may have noticed that the title of my talk today was The Colts of Corinth Revisited. Well, that's because the Corinthian coinage, when the people of Corinth first started making coinage, they chose the winged horse, Pegasus, which was tamed at the city of Corinth, as their symbol for the obverse of their coins, as you can see here. And so as a result, numismatists often call Corinthian coinage Colts or Pegasi for the horse that's upon them. Then the Corinthians also chose to use as an ethnic the first letter of the word Corinth, or the kopa. But the kopa was an archaic letter form. It was a form of letter that went out of use. By the time we get to the Peloponnesian War in the mid-5th century BCE, the kopa had fallen out of use everywhere in mainland Greece. And so the Corinthians continued to use it because they were a conservative people. They didn't see any reason to change. And they didn't want anybody to get confused about their coinage. So instead of using a K, they'll continue using the kopa for the entire life of the coinage. And the same goes for the Pegasus. They'll keep that for the life of the coinage. Later in the 6th century, probably around 510, 490 BCE, the Corinthians will decide to add an image to the reverse, a coin type. So the reverse, in particular, Athena. Here you have the helmeted woman inside of a border, and it's Athena. And how do we know it's Athena? Well, because Athena is tied to the story of Pegasus. According to the myth, it was Athena that gave the bridle to the hero Bellerophon. And with that bridle, Bellerophon was able to approach Pegasus at the fountain of Pyrene. And here on this slide on the left-hand side, you can see that Pegasus is wearing a bridle. And so Athena fits the story. And so Athena from then on will appear on the staters or Pegasi of Corinth. Corinth will, in addition to issuing Pegasi, Corinth, of course, uses lots of fractional coinage. The problem with being a city that only issues large coins, like those Alexander coins with the Heracles on them, or the Pegasi, is that those coins are too valuable to use for most things. If you walked into the bakery with a Pegasi and you wanted to buy bread, they would have to give you bread for probably most of 3 or 4 months at a time. It's just too much money to use for regular transactions. So most cities, like America does with its currency and many other states do with their currency now, issued fractional issues or smaller denomination coinage. For example, they issue a trihemidram, and this is the coin that has the myth of Bellerophon. Bellerophon riding the Pegasus. On the obverse of the coinage and on the reverse, you can see the chimera or chimera, the mythical monster that he defeated, which was head of a lion with also the head of a goat, which breathes fire, and the tail is a snake. It was a truly unpleasant monster that killed lots of heroes before Bellerophon showed up. Then the city also will issue a drachma. The drachma is 1/3 of the stater, 1/3 of the Pegasi. So that's the main fraction that they're going to use, and they'll also issue a hemidrachma, so half of a drachma, or 1/6 of the stater. And I'm not going to go through all the fractional coinage. It's enough to know that they also issued those, right all the way down to 1/24 of a stater. So we've got our coins, we've got our Pegasi. Well, another thing numismatists, like historians, like most scholars like to do, is compartmentalize their evidence in order to be able to make it manageable. Numismatists are no different from anybody else. So back in the early 20th century, in 1938, a numismatist named Oscar Revell, who had spent more than 2 decades studying the coins of Corinth, finally published his chronology for the mint at Corinth. And what he did was he went through and he looked at all the coinage and he did die studies of as much of the coinage as he could find. And he put that coinage into 6 periods. And the 6 periods you can see for yourself here on the slide. He also assigned to each of those periods absolute chronological dates. In other words, real dates that were fixed in history. Now, the dates that he proposed at the time, they've been revised since then, but this gives you an idea of the scheme that he used. And this scheme looked really good for, well, about 50 years. It held up nicely. In addition to a die study and also looking at archaeological evidence, he also used style. He used what do the coins look like as a way in order to figure out which coins go where. And so period 5 coins he put into all of one group because they all are of a style that is particularly lovely. And you can see that here on this slide. If you compare this, for example, we go back to, say, this one, you can see almost immediately, this is a period 2 Pegasus. You can see that this is much more refined, a much nicer looking as far as Ravel was concerned. And so for him, this is part of period 5. But it wasn't by style only that he categorized these. You'll notice on the right-hand picture that on the reverse of this coin, there's the letter alpha, or A, right next to an astrologus. And so the letter A is part of a series of alphabetic control marks that Ravel noticed, and so that's how he categorized all of these period 5 coins. He wanted to do a die study of period 5, but when he went to do it, he looked at all of the coinage, and what he realized was there's too much coinage. Numismatists estimate that there are 30,000 or more surviving examples of staters, Pegasi, from period 5. And if you've ever tried to count that high, 30,000 is an awful lot of images to keep in your head at once. And so Ravel declared it's impossible. You can't do a die study. And so he put them all the letters together, and he created a chronology for them. He also set aside period 6. And period 6, as you can see on this, he called barbarous. He just said they're ugly, they're unattractive, how could the same mint have issued this and this? So he lumped all the ugly coins into period 6. And so that is what I work on. I work on periods 5 and period 6 of Corinth. Since Ravel could not do a die study, I decided, well, I think I'm going to do one. But how could I do one if there are 30,000 coins out there? And for that, we come back to the fractional issues. It turns out that the drachma, as you can see on this coin right here on the left-hand side of your slide, and the hemidrachma, as you can see on the coin on the right-hand side of your slide, they also have the alphabet on them, and they have the exact same letters that we find on the Pegasi. You see the delta under her chin on the left and the Omicron behind her neck, so D and O if you like. And then over on the picture on the right, she has a delta underneath her chin. And these two, by the way, are the heads of Pyrene, the nymph of Corinth, where the Pegasus was caught by Bellerophon. So I decided, well, I can work with the fractions. There aren't as many fractions. And so I started assembling my assortment of coins and coin images, and I have 5,000 images to work with. And I have found that it's possible to keep that many going at once. 30,000, not so much. 5,000, very doable. All right, so that's one part of the story that attracted me. The other part of the story that attracted me, though, is that the periods 5 and 6 that Ravel had given us, they happen at a particularly interesting time in Greek history. As you can see from this slide, I've already talked about the first line. Corinth begins striking coins in 540 or so, 545, 525, somewhere in there. I think probably about 540. But the next date that pops up on your slide is 355, and that's because there were huge food shortages in Greece at the time. And we know that the Greeks needed to import a great deal of grain, both from North Africa, as also from southern Italy and also from Sicily. And we find an extraordinary number of Corinthian coins in Sicily and southern Italy during this time. And they all happen to be, many of them happen to be period 5 and period 6 coins. And so clearly Corinth is using these coins in order to ship silver over to Sicily, over to southern Italy, buy grain, ship grain back, and then sell the grain on the market. So that's one kind of interesting thing. There we have famine going on. Second kind of interesting things about this period is it's the period in which Philip and Alexander move out to try to conquer the world, Alexander in particular. And so I was wondering, do the coins of Corinth actually show how the campaigns of Alexander developed? Were those campaigns, were those victories making an impact on how the Corinthian coinage was minted? Then in the period after Alexander dies in 323, Corinth will change hands often. It goes through a bunch of different powerful leaders. Well, each one of those leaders is going to strike their own coin. Will that also affect the way the coins are minted in Corinth? That was of interest to me. The last of these guys to mint their coins in Corinth is Demetrius Poliorcetes, or Demetrius the Besieger. He takes control of Corinth in 303, as you can see there, and he will hold Corinth until 285. By 285, he has invaded Asia Minor in order to take on another powerful leader at the time. And in the process of that war in 285, Demetrius Poliorcetes was captured in battle, and he'll die in 283. And so the management of Corinth passed to his son, and his family will retain control of Corinth on and off again. That's going to occasionally pass out of their control until 196. And I also wondered, will that also show up in the coinage? And then finally, in 146 BCE, Rome is there. Rome had been in Greece since 196 and before. And in 146, the Romans, tired of the Greeks constantly rebelling against their, what they thought, proper management, the Romans under Lucius Mummius burned Corinth to the ground, sacked the city, drove most of the people out of the city at the time. And so the coinage ends there. And I wondered, would we be able to see the problems, the tensions, and the crises that are happening in Corinth as we lead up to the year 146? All of that attracted me to this story. And so with that, I decided to undertake a die study of Corinth. It has taken many years, but recently I was able to finally come up with a proper chronology for the city of Corinth. And to give you an idea of how important that is, Corinth is the last major city of the major cities that start minting coinage on Greece for which we don't have a good absolute chronology for the end of the mint. What I'm going to be talking about on this slide, when we talk about chronology, there's two kinds of chronology with numismatics. And the same is true of archaeology, actually. We have relative chronology and absolute chronology. Absolute chronology are dates. Those are fixed dates in the historical records that we can look at and say, this occurred on this date. For example, Alexander becomes king in 336. He then dies in 323 BCE. Those are absolute dates. That's Alexander's absolute chronology. The mint of Corinth, we don't have those. We know when the mint began, roughly, but we have no idea when these periods begin and end in the 4th century of Corinth. We do know the coinage ends in 146 because Rome sacked the city. The city had no capacity for minting coin after that. But otherwise, we don't know the internal dates. Relative chronology, that's the relationship between these series in period 5, those alphabetic letters that I talked about. When you put those in order, that provides you with a relative chronology, the chronology of the letters in relationship to each other. And that's important because when you're an archaeologist or a numismatist looking at a particular coin, let's say you found a hoard, and in that hoard you found some of these coins with the letters you see on this slide. If you know what order these letters go in properly, then you can figure out, maybe that'll help you understand the date of the hoard, or maybe that will help you understand the relationship between a number of the coins inside the hoard. So relative chronology is also extremely important. Well, Ravel, when he looked at all the letters, he decided that this is the proper, on the right-hand side, order of these coins. This is the proper relative chronology. And he came up with 12 series. And you can see them listed from earliest at the top to latest at the bottom. And his ordering of these was not exactly scientific. He based it on style, so the look of the coins. The last letter group was based on archaeological evidence, which I'll come to in a moment. So things look pretty good, and it went about that for about almost 50 years. And then in 1986, another numismatist came along, the keeper of the coins at the British Museum, and he had re-examined a number of the coins of Corinth, and he also said, without doing a die study, by the way, he said, Ravel was wrong. We need to reorder the coins. And so he did. He created a new relative chronology for the coins that you can see in the left-hand chart, working from top to bottom. And you can see, if you look from left to right, how much he changed. And some of the things he changed quite a bit. Among other things, he took the delta iotas, which Ravel had said were 2 series, and he changed it into 1. He had also moved a number of series around. What he used to do this was the analysis of archaeological finds, as well as also some analysis of the style. And through the archaeological evidence, he knew that the epsilon and the nu, the E and the N series, must be first and must be second. And then he also knew that the Delta Omicron, or DO series, must be last. So you can see how that looks, and things went well, but Jenkins didn't stop there. Working with another numismatist, he also proposed a revised absolute chronology for these two periods. Ravel had, as you can see in the chart on the right, suggested that the period 5 began in 387 and ended in 307, nice 80-year run. And period 6 began in 306 and ended 4 years later, which seems awfully tight. And actually, Ravel had ended his even closer than that. Period 6 went through a bit of adjustment between Ravel and Jenkins. On the left, you'll notice that Jenkins, working with Colin Cray, had come along and said, no. The period 5 must start in the middle of the 4th century, around about the time Corinth becomes active in Sicily, and it must end in 304. He based that on archaeological finds, and he said period 6, 4 years is too small a period for the number of coins that fit into period 6, so period 6 must last from 306 down to 243, because in 243, Corinth began to ally itself with a number of other cities in a military alliance. And when it did that, it began striking coins for that alliance and stopped striking its own Pegasi. In fact, Pegasi ceased to exist by then. So Jenkins said 243. And this sounded good. Sounds really good, actually. There's just one problem with that. It doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because period 6 is still too short. There are still too many coins to fit in the period between 306 and 243. On top of that, we have archaeological evidence that suggests that the coins of Corinth must date after 243, but not the Pegasi. The Pegasi really did stop in 243. Jenkins was right about that. But the fractional coinage that still has on its obverse the Pegasi and its reverse the head of Pyrene, and also on the hamidrams, which also have Pyrene on them, those continued right down up until or nearly until 146. So now I have a puzzle. First, I have to figure out the relative chronology of these coins, and then I have to figure out the proper absolute chronology, because we need both of those things. So I started analyzing these coins. And as I said before, you look at the drams, and some of the coins have very attractive delta alphabetic letters on them. Very easy to read, easy to find. You can see there's all kinds of cues on this coin that you can use to try to figure out, how will I know when two coins belong together? Well, I'll show you an example. When a numismatist starts looking for die links, what she's going to do is she's going to pull out two coins. And she'll compare the types, the coin types on the two coins. These two coins have, this is the reverse of two Pegasi of Corinth. You'll notice on the left-hand side, you may see behind the helmet, there's a letter. On the right-hand picture, there's another letter along with a sword. We know immediately from or astrologus, you know immediately from this hooked weapon that these two coins don't match. There's clearly not a die link. On top of that, you also know the coin on the right has an alpha, the coin on the left has a lambda. Well, then they don't match. That might not tell you anything. But then the numismatist is going to flip the coins over and look at the obverse. And when you look at the obverse of these two coins, what you realize is they're the same. These are two coins that use the same obverse die. And what you look for when you're trying to look for die links, at least with Pegasi, you can count the feathers, you can look at the way the legs are working, both the front legs and the back legs, you can look at the tail, you may look at the way the mane is spread, you might look at the minor feathers, keep count of those. There's all kinds of different things you can look at, because these two coins are really well preserved. Not all coins will look this way, as we'll see as I move along. So now you can see this is what a numismatist is doing when they're doing a die study, looking for coins that don't match and looking for coins that do. And as it happens, these two coins are the first two coins that I ever matched together, beginning of my die study. In fact, they happened to be the first day I was working on my die study. I noticed this match, and you can see on the left-hand side you have the obverses. They're a perfect die match. On the right, you have two different reverses. And what this told me at the time was that alpha and alpha lambda are related. And you can see that in the period on the chronology, Jenkins chronology, on the right-hand side of the screen. Okay, so now we get my own chronology popping up on the screen. You can see I've kept the epsilon and the nu in the front. I've kept delta Omicron at the back, but now I know that alpha lambda and alpha have to go together. What else did I find? Well, I started working through, looking for more die links. And over the years of working on this, and as you can see from these coins, not all the coins look great. I was able to find more die links. In the case of these two coins, the two obverse on the right, these two Pegasus obverse on the right, they are a match. They're a die link. Now, it's hard to tell given how rough the coin is on the bottom left-hand side, but when you look at these coins in 3D, when you look at them in person, you actually can see that they are a match. And once again, you compare the way the legs match together. You can look at the copa, the way the copa is aligned. You can also look at the way the wing is configured, the number of feathers, the mane. You'll also notice that this coin on the bottom looks, not only does it look more worn, more torn up, but it's also more worn from use over time. And so as a result, some features have gotten spread out or flattened. That's one of the things you have to watch for. The reverse of these two coins, they are not a match. You'll notice the upper one has a delta and an iota under the neck of the woman, Pyrene, the nymph, and behind her head is a fiale, which is a plate that you use for making sacrifices. And the one underneath it, the Pyrene nymph underneath her, has a delta under her chin, and then behind her head is again a fiale. So they're very similar, but not quite the same. But this die link told me that delta and delta iota go together. Whereas if you look at Jenkins' chronology over on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see he did not put those two together. And so now my die chronology had moved this far along. Well, you don't always look just for die links. I'd found a number of other die links, but then I got stuck. There were a bunch of coin series that I couldn't tell whether they belonged together or not. So the numismatist will then take the coins out and consider other features of these coins. For example, archaeological evidence. Are some of these coins associated in archaeology? Or are some of these coins associated in style? You'll notice on this slide you have three coins together. On the left is an alpha rho, in the middle is a gamma under her chin, and on the right is an iota under her chin. The obverses are across the top. And you'll notice these double wings. It's hardest to see on the first coin, but take my word for it, all three of these Pegasi have two wings, and that's unusual on the coins of Corinth. Usually it's just one that you see. A closer look, you could probably tell without any training, these look like they were carved either by the same engraver or by the same engraving shop. And that tells us these coins probably are in relation to each other. Doesn't mean there's a link. It just narrows down the number of series, so now I know where to go looking for more links. Perhaps I will be able to find a link between these series. So now I can put these three series together, and my chronology is coming together. I found a bunch more things. As you can see in brackets, the epsilon and the nu are determined by archaeological information as well as their relationship to other coins. The delta Omicron, its place in this order is determined by its archaeological information. A bunch of other coins have turned out to be links, and things look really good. Things are coming together. Well, we return to Alexander and the coins that were minted in his name after his death. Well, you'll notice that I have this delta coin on the top. You have Alexander on the left and the throne of Zeus, and underneath the throne of Zeus is a delta. You'll also see the wreath in front of Zeus's knees on the coin on the top. On the bottom coin, you'll notice that behind Pyrene's head is a delta inside of a wreath. These two coins show us that delta must be at the end of the series. We already know it links with delta iota, but it must be at the end. Can't be at the beginning of the series. And that's important because it also turns out that we have coins that show that the delta here on the left of this slide, you have a delta on the top of the coin. In the middle picture, you have delta iota on the top of Pyrene's head. And then on the far right, you have alpha lambda on the top of Pyrene's head. And it turns out that the two coins on the right are a die link. It also turns out that the coin on the left, it's a trihemidram, so it's not going to link up with the coins on the right, but there are also drams with a delta on them, and they are very similar to that delta iota. And what's similar about them is you'll notice all three of these coins, they're all reverses, have a set of armor behind Pyreni's neck. They have that control mark of the armor there. And that tells us these three actually do belong together. So that means that, lo and behold, two of the letters in the series are used twice. Something that we hadn't counted on earlier. Ravel and Jenkins had both assumed, although Jenkins did admit it was possible, that the delta and the delta iota are used twice. And that's not entirely surprising. There aren't that many ancient names. If these letters indicate ancient names, then there's not that many ancient names that they probably could have been drawn from, and so it's not that surprising to find that if these letters refer to names, that people with the same names or similar names are running the mint, and maybe that's why they do it. But now we have a relative chronology for Corinth. Or do we? Because there's one more series. While working on this project, I discovered a new series, a series called New Omicron. You can call it the No series if you want, but it's the New Omicron series. And I first encountered it in the dram that's at the bottom of the slide. But you'll notice that this Alexander coin at the top, Posthumus Alexander, has a Nu and an Omicron underneath the throne of Zeus. And what this means is that this letter must also be at the end of the series. And we know that these coins are being struck by Demetrius Poliorcetes just before his invasion of Asia Minor. And so this tells us that this coin must belong, this series, part of the series, must be at the end of our relative chronology. And so this is the new relative chronology for Corinth period 5. It's been waiting over 100 years to come out. Now we have it. And you'll see that New Omicron is at the end. Everywhere you see a dash between two coins, those are die-linked, and that's a secure dating. A secure way of putting them in order. And underneath that, Jenkins, you can see Jenkins' suggested chronology, which has now been proven to be incorrect. So this will help us. This will help numismatists immensely to figure out relationships between different coins. It will help in archaeological relationships. But it also means we can come up with a new chronology. And this is extremely important because Jenkins had suggested, as you can see in the chart on your left, a mid-4th century to 304 date for the Series 5, and period 6 must start in 306 and run down to 243. And that's clearly wrong. We now know, because of the relationship between the epsilon and the Nu, the first two coins in that series, and coins in southern Italy, we know that the period 5 must start around 350, possibly even as early as 360, though I'm going to say 350, circa 350 for now. We know that because Demetrius Poliorcetes was captured in 285 and his son took over and made changes to the mint, we know that period 5 must end in 285 or 283, 20 years later than it was thought. And this leaves lots of room for activity. We also see the period 6 can't end in 243 because the fractional coinage clearly continues past 243, probably continuing right down to or nearly to 146 BCE. And we know this from archaeological evidence as well as the number of dies that get used. And so what the project has come out with is a new relative chronology for Corinth, which we need. Not just for numismatics, but also for all kinds of other fields of study. We also have an absolute chronology for the later Corinthian mint. But the study is important for one other reason. You could look at all of this and say, oh, well, numismatists are going to be interested, and archaeologists are numismatists. Archaeologists are going to be interested in this evidence. What about the bigger picture, Dr. Brice? Well, what the relative chronology allows us to do is then we can go in with our statistical models, and we can figure out, based on the number of dies that survive and the number of links that we have for each of those dies within each series, we can actually calculate how many dies, roughly, there were originally. And I do mean rough. So we can come up with a rough math of how many dies there were. Now, if we take our ballpark number of 10,000 per reverse and 30,000 coins per obverse, and we know how much silver is in each coin, we can actually calculate how much coin, roughly, Corinth was using for its fractional coinage. And that gives us a sense of how active the mint was. We can also take that and extrapolate that for the staters. To an extent, we can get a sense of how much silver Corinth is using. And how much silver Corinth is using matters a great deal because Corinth does not own silver mines. Every piece of silver that Corinth put into production, it's putting into production because it's acquired its silver through trade and taxation. Ships coming into the harbor at Corinth have to pay a duty in order to use the harbor. Merchants unloading or loading cargo have to pay a duty to the city of Corinth. All this silver, which they have to pay in silver, is going in to make Corinth's silver. So when Corinth has more silver, it can strike more coinage. When Corinth has less silver, it can't strike so much coinage. And sure enough, when we look at this relative chronology for the fractional coinage of Corinth, what we find is that minting at Corinth was extremely erratic. Extremely erratic. Some series, for example, the Epsilon series was very small, very few dies. The Nu, quite a bit bigger. And then the first delta and the second delta iota series are extremely small. They either didn't have much silver, or the economy wasn't good, or there wasn't much demand. And then the production goes up, and we see a huge number of alpha series. Drachmas are getting struck. Numerous dies, lots of changes are going on then. And then it goes down, and then there's a decrease. And then it increases again when we get to the second delta iota and delta coins. An immense increase. And then that goes into decline during the alpha epsilon and delta Omicron series. And then it increases again under new Omicron. So we get a sense that coin production in Corinth isn't just continuous. It's not a straight flat line, and it's not even an even line. It's all over the map. And that's what this relative chronology provides us an opportunity to do. In addition to that, because we can see this silver, it gives us a chance to explore the economy of Corinth and the economy of central Greece. As one of the most important ports in mainland Greece in the 4th century, Corinth is doing an extraordinary amount of trade, east and west, north and south, and from the Peloponnese into central Greece. And so the numismatic evidence that we get gets us a chance to provide a better understanding of the ancient Greek economy. And with that, we get a better understanding of the monetization of the ancient economy, which can help us understand why does money spread, or coins I should say, why do coins spread so fast in the Greek world? And why do some cities adopt them and other cities don't? And what does this tell us about the use and adoption of coinage in later periods of history and change that we see even in the 20th century with our coinage of the modern world now? So I've given you a great deal of information. You have much to take away, but I hope that you've gotten out of this a sense of not only my research, but also why numismatics has so much more to offer so many different fields. And it's important to know that the research that I've presented here today, I bring into my class. Faculty research matters. It makes teaching better. Students learn from this. I've got a project my students are doing right now where they're also going to take coins and they're going to try to figure out, based on American coins, why are our coins bilingual, and what does all this tell us about the civilization that created this coin? It's a really cool assignment, and it's because I do this research. Thank you.